Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. You know that beat, that pulse in almost every song you've ever loved? It comes from an instrument we all think we know, the drum kit. But the story of how it went from a pile of junk to a powerhouse of precision, well, that's a story you probably haven't heard. So let's get into it. Just look at this. On the left, you've got the drum set super cluttered, humble beginnings. And on the right, that sleek, powerful beast we know today. I mean, the difference is just staggering, right? But this isn't just about a glow-up. We're talking a complete reinvention of sound, of function, of purpose.
Which brings us to the big question. How in the world did this happen? How did a messy contraption turn into this finely tuned engine of rhythm? The answer is actually pretty amazing. The music itself demanded it. The instrument had to evolve to keep up.
Okay, so our story doesn't start in some famous rock club. Nope. It starts in the theaters and dance halls way back in the late 1800s, where a very practical problem needed a very creative fix. So picture this. After the Civil War, these big military-style brass bands are super popular. But when they start playing indoors for vaudeville shows, they hit a snag. The orchestra pits are tiny, and the budgets even tinier. You just couldn't fit or afford to have 3 or 4 different guys playing the bass drum, the snare drum, and the cymbals. So what was the solution? The trap kit, which is short for contraption kit. And yeah, it was exactly what it sounds like. It was this wild collection of drums, cymbals, sound effects like woodblocks and cowbells, all rigged up so just one person could play everything. It was basically a one-man percussion section, born out of pure necessity. But the real breakthrough, the one invention that truly made the whole thing possible? It was this. In 1909, William F. Ludwig Sr. perfects the bass drum pedal, complete with a return spring. For the very first time, a drummer could play the bass drum with their foot, which freed up both hands to play everything else. This, right here, was the single biggest step towards the modern drum kit we know today. It was a complete game changer. So, with the basic mechanics now in place, this contraption was ready for its first huge musical test, the ridiculously high-speed, high-energy world of jazz. You know, one of the most iconic sounds in all of jazz is the hi-hat. But it didn't just appear out of nowhere. Its very first version was this thing, the low boy. It was literally just a couple of cymbals on a foot pedal, maybe a foot off the ground, that you'd use to stomp out accents. So the next logical step was, hey, let's raise it up a little bit. This created something called the sock cymbal. So it's getting higher, a little more useful, but you're still mostly playing it with your foot. And this is it, the final leap. By raising the stand all the way up to waist height, the hi-hat was finally born. And what's so cool about this is what it meant for the music. Drummers could now play the cymbals with their sticks, creating that continuous, sizzling chick sound that would become the absolute heartbeat of swing music. And the man who pulled all of these new toys together and put them center stage for the whole world to see was Gene Krupa. Playing with the Benny Goodman Orchestra, he wasn't just some guy keeping time in the back. He was a full-blown star right up front. Krupa's influence was just massive. He's the guy who standardized that 4-piece setup. Bass, snare, 2 toms, that's still the core of most kits today. He actually worked with drum companies to create fully tunable toms, turning them from just a thud into a melodic instrument. And of course, with that absolutely electrifying solo on Sing Sing Sing, he pretty much single-handedly invented the modern drum solo. Now, while the music is pushing the kit's design forward, there's a totally different revolution happening in material science, one that would forever change the sound and, just as importantly, the reliability of every drum on the planet. For centuries, drum heads were made from animal skin, usually calf skin. And yeah, it has this beautiful, warm sound, but for a working drummer, it's a total nightmare. If it gets humid, it goes slack. If the air is dry, it gets super tight. You're constantly retuning. Then, along comes Mylar, a new polyester film developed after World War II. It was stable, it was durable, it was weatherproof. It was the perfect material. Well, almost. See, the problem wasn't the Mylar itself. It was figuring out how to attach it to the drum. The first attempts just tacked or stapled the plastic onto a wooden hoop, the same way they did with calfskin. But as Bill Ludwig pointed out, if you cranked up the tension, the Mylar would just rip right out of the hoop. It couldn't take the pressure. So how did they solve this puzzle? Well, in 1957, a drummer named Remo Belli teamed up with the chemist Sam Muchnick. They completely threw out the old tack and hoop idea. Instead, they designed this clever aluminum channel to grip the Mylar film, and then they poured in a liquid resin that locked it in place forever. The result?
a drumhead that you could tune high and tight without ever worrying about it pulling out. This design was so perfect, it's still what virtually every drumhead maker in the world uses today. All right, so now we have a drum kit armed with consistent, durable plastic heads. It was finally ready for its next great test, the pure, raw volume and power of rock and roll. While jazz drummers were weaving these intricate patterns on the ride cymbal, rock music stripped it all back to one simple, essential element, the backbeat. That thunderous crack of the snare drum on beats 2 and 4, that became the undeniable can't-help-it-dance-to-it foundation of this new music. This table really sums up the whole journey perfectly. You look at the jazz era, it gave us the basic mechanics, the pedal, the hi-hat, and pioneers like Krupa who standardized the whole thing. The goal was to create a versatile rhythmic engine. Then, bam, the rock era comes along, and it takes that engine and supercharges it for pure power. The backbeat is king now, so drummers like Ringo Starr and John Bonham needed bigger drums for more volume, thicker cymbals that wouldn't break, and hardware that was built like a tank. They weren't just playing rhythms anymore, they were creating seismic grooves. But of course, the evolution didn't stop there. The next generation of incredible players started asking a new question. What happens if you combine the mind-bending technical skill of jazz with the raw, untamed power of rock? The answer came from drummers like Tony Williams. And this guy was a true prodigy. He joined the legendary Miles Davis Quintet when he was only 17 years old, and he completely rewrote the rulebook for what a drummer could do. Williams was one of the very first fusion drummers. With Miles Davis, and later in his own band, Lifetime, he blended the complex improvisational language of jazz with the sheer volume and attitude of rock music. Imagine all that intricate cymbal work, but played with the driving force of a rock beat. He played with a fire that jazz hadn't really seen before, while having a technical ability that was light years ahead of most rock players. He was the bridge between these two massive worlds. So, from a vaudeville contraption to a jazz engine, from a rock powerhouse to a fusion chameleon, the drum kit has never been a static thing. It has always morphed and changed to serve the needs of the music, which really just leaves us with one final thought. What's next? What new sounds, what new genres are out there right now, forcing this incredible instrument to reinvent itself all over again?